Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest back on, Alex Bush. This is his second time on. We were just talking off air. Last time he was on was back in July of 2021. So we're super excited to have him back on. If you're not familiar with Alex, he's a co-founder and coach at Physique Development. He graduated from USI in 2017 with a degree in exercise science. And at the time that I wrote this a while back, he resided in Kentucky. He's now in Columbus, Ohio, with his wife, Sue, and pups, Gus and Tucker. So, Alex, welcome back on, man. Appreciate you coming back on the podcast.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be back.
Yeah. So, as I just found out off air, you actually just recently moved. I wanted to kind of just get a general update on you, with everything that was going on. So, just moved to Columbus. How was that? I know you said there were some reasons why you moved there. Just kind of curious to hear how how it's been in Columbus now at this point.
Absolutely. So we lived in Louisville, Kentucky for 3 years, and it was a temporary move for us when we first got there. It was a transition period for Sue and I, as when we were dating, we were long distance. And so we just wanted to stop being long distance more than anything. And I was living in Evansville, Indiana, and she was here in Columbus that we're at now. And so that was kind of the middle point that we would often visit. So we were there for a short period, but knew that we were going to be going somewhere else in the nearish future when the opportunity presented itself. And so 2 years ago now, it's crazy because, like our last time speaking in 2021 would have been right before we moved, I suppose. And we were able to move back into Sue's hometown and get closer to family and be here in Columbus, Ohio as the closest city. The area that we're technically in is Dublin, Ohio. And it's been really great. This is an area that we've always enjoyed. It's an up and coming area. There's a lot of new things going on. There's a lot of new development as a whole. It's very clean. That's a big thing for me personally, is just a clean, inviting area. And a lot of the space around here is very clean and nice. So I enjoy that a bunch, as well as being close to family has been a blessing for sure. So we've really enjoyed the move, as well as having a little bit more of a sports opportunity of consuming, OSU, as well as having hockey here and just different sports. There's just more going on. So that's a nice thing as well.
Yeah. Have you been to a Blue Jackets game yet?
We've been to a couple. So hockey is not something I played growing up. I feel like I played almost every other sport, but hockey was one that I did not indulge fully into. And so the pace of the game is so fast to me.
Yep.
I mean, it is like ricocheting back and forth. And so the pace is challenging to keep up with, but I do enjoy the game itself. As I learn more about the sport and I have more friends here that enjoy going to games and kind of learning more as they talk through it, I'll be enjoying it more and going to more games, I hope.
Yeah, man, I feel like with hockey, it's if you're not a big fan of hockey, it's like watching it on TV is not very, like you said, it's hard to kind of see what's going on. But then when you actually go to a game, like you said, it is fast paced. But I feel like people love like just going to the games, and that's like what they're always super thrilled about is like the pace and whatnot. I also know Columbus too is known for the cannon that they have there. Was that something that you were aware of before you went to the first game or not?
That is hilarious that you say it, because I was startled that the first time that thing went off, as well as the absolute light show that
Yeah.
they give every time that there's a goal scored or something of significance. I mean, it's like a club. Like, I really was blown away by the theatrics that they add into the game to allow for people to stay engaged and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's like kind of the running joke for like a lot of people that like go to the games that are like, oh man, that freaking cannon. Like it just like you said, it scares you every time. Even if you know what's coming to it, still I feel like gets you. So, with your move and everything like that, I know I'm pretty sure you have a home gym. Was that something that you like had initially when you were in Kentucky? And like how's the move there with that, and kind of how's your home gym looking now here in Columbus?
So the home gym was a challenge. We had a little bit of the equipment while we were at the house in Louisville, and we lived on a hill. So that was the other hurdle of moving the equipment down from the garage, down the hill, and getting it loaded up. And so we had to tear down everything. So if you, as a listener, are familiar with Prime Fitness, we have the Prodigy Rack, which is going to have cable towers on it. And each stack is going to have, I believe, 300 pounds on each. And then you have multiple pulleys. So you have top pulleys and then adjustable pulleys on each side. And so it's quite the contraption. I mean, it's a big piece. And we had to take that down to the studs basically and get it down to the nuts and bolts so that we could move it, because it was too heavy to try and move altogether. So I had to tear that down, and then moving dumbbells from 5 to 130 is a challenge. And then we have the like a leg extension, we have a lying leg curl, we have a leg press. So moving all of that equipment was a challenge for sure. We got here to Columbus and we had let our movers know that we had a lot of equipment, very heavy equipment that was needing to be moved. And the people that were in Louisville were great. They were very well equipped. They were strong. They were able to work together as a team to move the equipment. We got here to Columbus and we get here on the day of moving and we're waiting on the movers. We see a car pull up. We we see the doors open up. A cloud of smoke comes out of this vehicle and we get four high school kids who are 100% stoned going in, and they probably have never lifted a weight in their entire life. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we could not have a worse setup to this situation. And as we opened up the moving truck and I showed them like, hey, this is what you guys are going to be moving. These guys started to pick up like 5-pound dumbbells and 5-pound plates, and like that's all they were carrying in. And so I actually by myself moved almost all of the dumbbells as well as a large majority of the equipment that I could pick up on my own. As I'm calling the owner of the moving company, like, hey, you've got to send more guys. Like, this is not going to work. These guys have no idea what they're doing. And so after a few hours, they ended up sending 3 other guys that were a huge help to actually getting the equipment in the house. But myself and my father-in-law did a majority of it, as well as Sue. And I will tell you this, that the day after getting all that equipment into the house was the most sore I have ever been. I woke up that next day and I could not like close my hands. Like my hands were just stuck like this. There was no me closing my hands, my lower back, my legs, every joint in my body was aching so badly. And there's a couple of videos that we have that are hysterical of me just whining that day after. I'm sure that I wasn't in all, I mean, it was the theatrics. I'm sure I was embellishing a little bit, but it was a challenge to get it all here. And we got a little bit more equipment. We got a Smith machine, a hammer strength horizontal row, the plate loaded,
Awesome.
and I got another functional trainer. So the Prodigy rack has its own cables, as I talked about, and then we got another functional trainer just to allow for us to both be able to train in there at the same time. Because if I'm squatting, then Sue can't really use the cables if that was the case. And so it just gave us more opportunities to be able to train in there at the same time. And I have tons of stuff that I want to add. I'm just out of space. Like there's other pieces of equipment. I'm very hung up on getting a pendulum squat at the
Yeah.
moment that I have no space for at all, and would love to either get more space somewhere or even get a like a storage unit and get some of the equipment that we have now out and then bring some new pieces in with the anticipation to move the equipment out at some point. But right now I'm pretty confined to the space I have.
Is it like set up in like a garage, or is it like you have like like space, like extra space in the house, or
It's in the garage. So we're fortunate here that we have a detached garage as well. So we have a 2-car and a 2-car, and then the we use the one for our cars, and then we have the other that's going to be the garage or the gym space. So it's a 2-car garage. It's not a ton of space. Like individuals who come over and train at the house, we generally will ask them of, does this look bigger or smaller than what you see in the videos on YouTube and stuff like that? And they're like, smaller.
smaller?
Smaller, yeah. Because I mean, when we're shooting in there, we're moving all the equipment to have it in the perfect spot so we have the space to shoot. And so that's another thing that I would just like to have more space, because it is pretty crammed. Like I would say at most you could have like 2 people training the same session, like training together, and then another person could be doing different things in there, but you'd have to know what it was. Like my in-laws or my sister-in-law, I would probably say like it's fine for you to come over and train, but there are going to be some hazards that potentially present themselves if you don't know exactly what you're doing, because some of the stuff is just very close together type situation.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned you wanted a pendulum squat. Is there any like particular brand there that you're looking for with that? And then if you could maybe just hit on the other, I'm just curious, like the other pieces of equipment that you said you were kind of interested in as well too.
Sure. So the pendulum, I am wanting the Atlantis
Okay.
pendulum is probably my favorite one. I think the easiest to get would be the Arsenal Strength one. That one's fine. I think it is a little big within the back plate, and I think the range of motion gets limited because of where that stopper is at. And I think you can move it. I'm not 100% certain on that. And then the shoulder pads are a little thick as well. So there's just some like small components that if I can have a better one, I'll take it. And the Atlantis I find to be a really great one. There's a Predator Strength brand that's in Croatia, I believe. That is another really nice one, but I don't know if I want to pay the fees to get it from
Yeah.
Croatia type situation.
Is is
Go ahead.
Atlantis, is that the one that you can kind of like put your hands forward and hold in front of you if you want to, or is that a different one that
Yeah,
I'm thinking of?
you would be able to have like there's a piece in front, and when you lift it off, that will rotate. That's like the catch bar, and so you
Yeah,
could
okay.
have your arm there to for support as you're squatting through. Other pieces that I would want to have, I really would want a seated hamstring curl.
Yeah.
I prefer the seated hamstring curl over the lying. I at the time I wanted the lying more, and now I've kind of changed my mind. So I'd like to have a seated. A horizontal row that would be more chest supported than the hammer strength would be another one. A like a plate loaded chest press, the Nautilus converging press, if I could find one of those would be amazing. That's one of those older pieces that they don't make anymore, that if I could find it, I would buy that in a heartbeat. It's a really big foot plate though. Like it's a long piece of equipment. So any chest press would be nice. And then maybe like a vertical pull down like that. There's a Nautilus pull down that's really great as well. That's plate loaded that you don't really see a whole lot anymore. Those would be some pieces, but more machines relative to what I have at this time, just to give me some variance of exercise selection and those different things.
Yeah, like you said there, I mean, with the machines, it's like it's super nice to get those added in, but then they do take up a lot of space, and they're
Ton.
usually just you know, like something like the Prime Prodigy rack, like that's so versatile, especially for a home gym. And then it's like you get one of those machines, and it's like you can only specifically do that, but it would be freaking awesome to get something like that put in to the gym there on that. Do you ever see yourself going back into a gym, or do you think you'll pretty much just always kind of train in your home gym?
So I have a membership to a lifetime here for the winter, and really just using it for running at the moment. I've toyed with the idea of going in there to train, but I don't love their equipment. It's a lot of techno gym stuff that's
Yeah.
not the best from a biomechanical standpoint. And so I don't have a whole lot of interest in training, but the cardio equipment and using things like a ski erg or utilizing a row machine or something along those lines for me to get a little bit of high intensity work, as well as using their very nice treadmills. Because the reason I got the membership to begin with is that I was looking to buy a nice treadmill for here for me to be able to run on. Newsflash for anyone who is shopping for a treadmill and has no idea, they're very expensive. Like a good quality treadmill that you're going to be running on is pricey. And looking at the numbers, it only made sense that if I was only going to use it when it was extremely cold here and snowing, that it just get the gym membership and then cancel it when the weather improves and be able to go from there. So using the treadmills and running a little bit more has been what I've used it for the most so far.
I can't believe treadmills are that freaking expensive, for something that you could just like literally do outside most of the time. Like obviously, when it's super cold out or something like that, or maybe it's like super dark or something like that. But otherwise, it's like, man, that it's a hard investment to make, I feel like there with that.
It is. It is. And if I felt like I was going to use it all year round and be consistent with using it, I'd probably be more open to purchasing it. But I know that as soon as it gets nice out, I'll stop using it. So,
One more thing on the equipment. So the gym I go to has the Arsenal pendulum squat, and I don't think it's as great of a machine as like the other ones, kind of like you said there. Also, I feel like it's a little bit tougher to make it like more quad focus. At least that's kind of been my experience. And like I know some of the pendulums you can kind of use heel elevation if you want to. With that one, you're not able to do it because like the plate comes off the ground and stuff like that. So just a kind of few thoughts on that. And it's just freaking heavy as hell. I feel like that machine is just so freaking hard. That one
yeah.
specifically. So I mean, I know pendulum's hard in general, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they're humbling pieces of equipment, that's for sure.
Yep. Cool, man. Well, yeah, it's awesome. I love hearing about people's home gyms, just seeing what you have in there. And it seems like, something around the Prime Prodigy rack is usually like a good, like kind of starting point, expensive, but really good piece of equipment to have if you can get that. So I'd love to talk about your current training and what you're doing. I know you kind of mentioned you've been running a little bit more. Also, since last time we chatted, I feel like you've definitely put on some lean body mass for sure, like in terms of size and everything like that. So I'm just curious to kind of hear about what you've been up to from that standpoint. And then maybe we can also kind of tie in the cardio piece as well too. And that.
Sure. Yeah. So from the time that you and I last spoke, I was in a surplus, like maintenance to surplus for 2.5 years. I mean, I would say for 2 years, almost completely straight. And this year, actually, I guess it'd be more so that when we were speaking, I was getting into the surplus. I probably had been in it for a little while, and I maintained that for 2 years. And that was kind of my goal when I first started it, was that I was just going to stay in it and just train as hard as I could and just focus on performance as much as I could throughout that time. And I got tremendously stronger. I would say that there was a lot of hurdles from like a body image standpoint personally, which I think would come with anyone carrying more body fat than they like. And then also just eating oftentimes when I wasn't overly, hungry to do so type situation. But it paid dividends in terms of adding the muscle tissue that I was desiring to have. And so that time was spent really just trying to grow. And then as of late, so going into July of this year, my wife and I celebrated our 5-year wedding anniversary. And
Congrats.
so thank you. We had a 12-week diet series that we did for our YouTube channel and documented all that entire process. And that was the first dieting phase that I'd had in quite some time. And so I went from 230, I think the starting weight, and it's funny because I cheated a little. I cheated a little in the sense that I started the diet a little bit earlier than what we started to document to get myself to get the ball rolling a little bit. And so I started technically at 232. And then what was documented on YouTube, I started at 229. So anyone who's upset with me for taking off those 3 pounds first, I apologize. But I started at 229 and then made my way down to 204. And then I've hung around there for the better, like since then. So when we concluded the diet at the end of July, I've been hovering between 202 and 205 since that time. And as I reversed out of the diet for the wedding trip or the anniversary trip, I've been more so just getting more activity. As we've increased food, I've also increased my overall activity. So I've been closer to maintenance throughout that entire time frame. That's why I've been able to, of course, maintain the scale weight and those different factors, because I started to implement more running. And the reason for implementing more running since that time was that when we first started the diet, I was wanting to potentially run at that time. And I ran a mile, and I kid you not, coming from someone who played sports my entire life, played baseball in college, and had really hung my hat on athleticism from as early as I can remember. For me to run and feel the way that I did that day at 230 plus pounds, my everything in my body ached, every joint in my body, my ankles hurt, my shins hurt. I could not believe how winded I was from just running a mile. And I looked at myself in the mirror and was like, dude, you can't be doing this. This is not how we're going to go about our health and overall wellness. And especially with the position that I'm in within teaching and those different factors, it's like, I've got to figure this out. So I immediately hired, as I lost the weight. I knew that losing the weight was going to be a tremendous help of just me feeling better. And so once I lost the weight and felt a little bit more comfortable running, I hired a running coach, and her name is Erin. She's been phenomenal. She has helped me with different ailments that I thought I was just kind of stuck within my lower back and my hips and my knees and my ankles, all these different things. She's helped me work through a lot of that and allowed for me to run much more comfortably. And we do a lot of analysis on my running mechanics. And she's in person, which I knew I needed someone in person relative to online because of the hands-on nature that I knew that I probably needed. And so I've been working with her, and I've ran a couple 5Ks in this time frame, which have been really awesome. And my goal within the running at this moment is to run a half marathon here in April of this coming year, and be able to run that at an 8-minute mile for the entirety of the race. And so for the 5Ks, that's kind of what the pacing has been. And I've gotten a little bit better. I've ran around 24 minutes for the 5Ks thus far. And so I'll just continue on that path and accomplish that goal as the target for the time being.
Yeah, that's awesome. So have you noticed like any difference in terms of how you feel by adding in a little bit more cardio? Because I'm assuming based on kind of what you said there that it was pretty much, I'm sure it was just like steps that you maybe were focused on for the last little bit. I could be wrong on that, but it just sounds like based on what you said there.
Yes. So prior to the diet, I was just focused on steps. During the diet, we just tracked steps. I didn't have any specific cardio outside of steps that were implemented. We created the deficit mostly through my intake because of the workload that I had. It's one of those things where it's like I know I'm going to be sitting at my desk and need to be at my desk a good bit of my day. So creating the deficit more from food was the most applicable way to my life at that time. And so then once I got into the running and things that have changed for me, I feel a lot physically better. Like I just feel more able and have a little bit more bounce to me. I don't feel as as rigid or as sore as I kind of lingered soreness that I would experience previously. The other thing is that I implemented yoga. That's another thing that I kind of started this year, which has been more beneficial than I could have ever guessed it to be. I started it as more of a challenge to myself because I went into that first session feeling very anxious and felt like everybody was staring at me. It was a really good experiment for me to experience what some of my clients experience when they go into the gym for the first time. And I was like, okay, I need to be able to work through this. Like I am teaching other individuals to do this in the gym, a place where I feel tremendously comfortable. But in a yoga studio, I feel very out of place. I feel like everyone's staring at me. I feel like I'm not doing things correctly. I feel like I'm disrupting the flow of what's going on. I felt like a problem basically. And being able to work through those mental battles and being able to have that challenge was awesome for me. I've really enjoyed implementing that since January of this year. And I've had stints where I haven't been as consistent because life is life, but I've been for the most part going twice a week for some time now. And that has been a huge help to how I physically feel. And so that kind of in conjunction with the running has really changed where my health is at and how I feel and those different factors. So it's been a big benefit, but it has been a challenge of balancing lower body training with the yoga and then also with the running and trying to maintain the training volume that I did have. And what I have found is that with the maintaining the training volume, it's just making sure that my food is adequate and not putting myself in an unnecessary deficit or unbeknownst to me type deficit by running and then being like, well, I don't have the time and blah, 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 and I'm under on food. I just have to be more cognizant of making sure I get all of my food in so that I can maintain all the things because it's all equally important to me. Like I want to have the hard training sessions and I want to get the running in. Nothing is a priority above any of the others. Like they all cumulatively are important to me. And so I know that I've just got to prioritize it all.
Yeah. And so it sounds like there, again, because it kind of the thought for a while was like, hey, you do any amount of cardio, it's going to hurt your gains and whatnot. And I think as we found out, I think we always knew, but as we found out more recently, I feel like, it's like, hey, it actually really doesn't impact things as much. So long as kind of like you said, hey, food's there, recovery overall is there, you can probably make it work and you're smart with your programming, which kind of leads me to my next question. What does that look like for you? Is it like how many days per week lifting? How does that kind of look like with the running? Yeah. And I'm assuming, I'm sure as you kind of ramp things up for like the half marathon side of things, I'm sure that will probably change a little bit as well too, in terms of what that's going to look like for you.
Sure. So the running right now, I'm between 7 and 10 miles a week is kind of where I've been consistently, and the duration of the run is generally between 2 and 4 miles. My longest run is for sure if I run a 4 mile run throughout the week, that's going to be the longest that I run. I generally won't have like 4 miles and then 4 miles again later in the week. Resistance training, I'm having 4 sessions a week. So I have two upper and then two lower sessions that are in place. And then with the yoga, I have two 1 hour sessions. And I would label both of them as more restorative relative to it being like high caloric expenditure within those sessions. They are in a hot room, so I do sweat more, but in terms of caloric expenditure, it's not going to be this large excess that I'm getting rid of. With the training, the thing that I have found is that the greater intensity, so I'm performing less total working sets probably than what I was before, but those sets are just at a higher RPE. So
Yeah.
I think that that's the way that I've been able to maintain training the way that I want to and being able to balance that out with the running. So decreasing the overall total sets that I'm doing and then just increasing the intensity of those, probably eliminating any of the sets that I would have had at like a 7 RPE and sticking much closer to like an 8, 9, 9.5 type window.
Yeah, just making sure you train closer to failure and whatnot more often
Sure.
and things like that. What about like intensity wise from like running? Do you monitor that, or is it just kind of do you just go off of feel or yeah?
So we do monitor that, and right now our focus is getting my heart rate down for the runs and allowing for my pacing to me be okay with my pacing being a little bit slower when that heart rate needs to come down, because I'm just so competitive with myself of I know I ran this at whatever time and I can run it a little bit faster. I just want to shave off a second or two. And that's just my mentality with everything. And so I have to really pull back the reins and be like, this is not the focus. The focus is getting my heart rate down. And so right now the thing that we're focused on is getting into like the 140s for my runs consistently, just having an average heart rate of 140 beats per minute for a 2 mile run, a 3 mile run, a 4 mile run. And that's really coming with being more cardio adapt for sure. But it also comes down to me not pushing and being a crazy person as I always am.
I've been doing a lot more like biking for like my cardio, but my wife, she did want to do like a 5K. So I was like, hey, I better, run at least a little bit here because I hadn't ran in years. And man, I'll tell you what, one of the biggest things I noticed was like it was freaking hard to keep that heart rate down like at all. And then it just kept like just I don't know if this was something you've noticed, but it just kept climbing as it would go on. And it like towards the end, I'm like, shit, I feel like I'm not even like doing anything at this point. But that obviously got a little bit better as I started to run a little bit more and things like that. But yeah, it's definitely hard, I feel like, to kind of pull back it because it almost feels like you're not even doing anything at least initially there with that.
Yeah, and my background being in sports where I was just required to sprint. So my only gauge was not sprinting and sprinting. So
Yeah.
it's just one or the other, and I was going balls to the wall. And so I had to really find of, okay, you can run a little bit slower here. There's not just like it's not a light switch. It's much more of like a dimmer, and teaching myself that and alongside the coach or my running coach has been a tremendous help.
Yeah, and I feel like I don't know if this has been your experience, but I feel like it's nice to, I was the same way as you. I just hadn't done cardio for years. I mean, I played hockey once a week and then it was mostly just steps from there. But by incorporating a little bit more, it's nice to just get a little bit of a different like feeling afterwards. I feel like it's just a little bit different than weight training. Like I love weight training, like you said, it'll always be there, but I feel like the cardio side of things you just feel a little bit different afterwards. Kind of that runner's high, I guess that people kind of talk about there.
Yeah, I find that it is fantastic for me to work through some things in my mind. I
Yeah.
find that with both yoga and running, it just allows for me to slow down enough to where I can kind of better organize what's going on and floating around in my mind. And I see that with a lot of the physical activity that I do within the resistance training. I find some of my best ideas when it comes to client stuff, or I'll have epiphanies within that, or even content. I'll have moments when I'm working out that's like, oh, we can do things of that nature. So I'm always thinking I know that the physical activity is where I find my best thinking. So I use that to my advantage with the running and with the yoga most specifically.
Has this changed your mind in terms of like how you would program for clients or anything? Like, are you maybe a little bit more like, hey, I think maybe I've changed my mind. Like, I'm going to program a little bit more cardio, not necessarily from like the calorie burn side of things, but more so just like the overall health benefits of it. And then also on that, is there anything from like your standpoint that you've like maybe started to track a little bit more from like a metric standpoint, like resting heart rate or anything like that?
So for clients, I think that I probably incorporated more since I've had some of these epiphanies over the last year. I will say that I've always been a stickler for steps, which I think has become more of the norm within the industry, which is great. The steps are fantastic just to have that daily movement. And then the clients who are needing to like, especially for my clients who are sitting at a desk all day, that's the client who I'm speaking to probably the most. They're sitting at home, they work from home, or they are at a desk all day for their 9 to 5. And so getting them to a place where we're being a little bit more efficient with getting those steps in has been truly helpful. So I do that. That's another implementation of the running has been like, okay, if you wanted to get, let's say, 5,000 steps and you needed to catch up on that, we can run that and get it done in a much more time efficient way relative to walking, because walking to get 5,000 steps is going to be easily an hour. And we can do that probably in half the amount of time running at a pretty decent pace. We can do that in about a half amount of time with the running. And so if we can implement that a little bit throughout their regiment, it just allows for them to hit their protocols a little bit easier.
Yeah. And I'm assuming, like you said, you kind of just like tell them to kind of monitor like how intense they're going with it and like kind of watching their heart rate a little bit with that, making sure they're not like, getting into like the 180s, 190s, stuff like that with, if you were to kind of substitute that, for the walking.
Yes, and the other thing too is that with the running, like when I'm looking at their training, I can fix whatever's going on within their training. With their
Right.
running and their mechanics, I'm not going to be the best resource for if they've
Yeah.
got something going on. I have some general things that, hey, this could be beneficial for you. I can help you a little bit here. But really looking at their running mechanics, it's like I don't have the tools or the knowledge to fix that right away like I do within their resistance training. And so that's the other hurdle of with the running. I have to be very particular of who I recommend it to, because if they don't have a strong background in running and they're just trying to pick it up, I'm not going to be the person to really guide them from chapter zero to getting to a place where it's really beneficial for them and not having a lot of bumps in the road. And so I'm always very cognizant of that. And to answer your question on the metrics, changes in metrics that I'm following, I do a lot of data collection with clients to begin with. So I don't think there was a ton that changed when we're looking at their their sleep quality, their recovery, like the main big rocks that we're looking at. Of course, their resting heart rate could be beneficial for us to see if we're having a hindrance to their recovery, or they're having trouble falling asleep or not feeling well rested when they wake, or whatever the case may be. And so I may ask for more of those detail type data points if we start to see some of those larger rocks start to fall off, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper. But I also find that if we're tracking some of those more nuanced data points on a very regular basis, it does allow for some clients to get a little neurotic and overwhelmed by the quantity of data. And so I try to keep those in my back pocket until we see a reason, like a direct reason for getting those collected.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, just don't you don't want to give them like so many different things to track, kind of keep it simple, and then only track that if you feel like it's necessary, or something's kind of showing that you need to look into that a little bit more.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, a little tangent there on cardio. I thought that would be. I figured we would kind of dive into that a little bit. Real quick before we kind of dive into some glute training stuff, I'm just curious, is there any kind of lessons you had from your, I guess you would call it, whatever you want to call it, building phase, bulking phase, mass gaining phase? Was there any lessons that you had, maybe a couple top ones there, that you would take from that?
My tips for building muscle tissue, I would say give yourself more time than what you think. Like if you think that you need 6 months, give it a year. If you think you need a year, give yourself 18 months. The other being, it's not necessary for you just to eat as much as humanly possible. Find where your maintenance is, and then find a set point above that where calorically you're having a little bit of a surplus, but it's not so much that you're just seeing the scale just continuing to go up week after week after week. Be closer to like a pound to a pound and a half over the month, and you're going to feel a lot better and be able to make better progress. Your body image is going to be in a better position. And then the last thing is your digestion is the most important thing to you putting on that muscle tissue, bar none. Like if you're not digesting the food, if you're not able to eat consistently throughout the day, that's where you're really just going to fall off. So prioritizing your digestion is probably the biggest rock for you to fall in place. Like I've been saying this, and this may be a hot take for some individuals, is that digestion is the most important thing to muscle building, because without that, we're not getting in the adequate nutrients that we need. Without that, we're probably having some lackadaisical training sessions, because I I would say anyone listening to this, if you're training with an upset stomach or stomach discomfort in general, it really takes away from your training performance. And so those things alone allow for it to be like, okay, well, if the digestion is not in alignment, it really is taking away from the amount of muscle tissue or the quality of muscle tissue that you're able to gain.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love all three of those. On the digestion standpoint, what would maybe be some things that you would like commonly see? Like what would be some things for people to potentially look out to be like, oh, hey, this is off here from that standpoint.
So with the digestion, I think the first thing is making sure that the food sources that you're eating on a day-to-day basis sit well with you. Like these are things that you can consistently consume day after day, week after week, that are going to not be irritating for you. And the one thing I see many people run into is that they get behind with their calories, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
I'm in a surplus, so I'm just going to go out and grab a burger or I'm going to get a pizza, and then they have this copious amount of calories, probably closer to bed than what they need to. And so then they're not digesting that food well. They wake up, they have no appetite when they wake up. So then they push off the first meal, and then they get in this very vicious cycle of I'm intermittent fasting, but it's not that you're really intermittent fasting. It's just that you're so uncomfortable from the meal that you had way too late, way too many calories that didn't digest well. And then you're like finally getting hungry at noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then it just continues to be a very vicious cycle, and the digestion gets worse and worse and worse. And so paying attention to your schedule in which you're eating, because I think that that's going to be a huge help for you over that time frame. Continuing to track. This kind of goes, hand in hand with that, is that because people are just thinking, I'm in a surplus, I'm going to continue to eat no matter what. And as long as I'm getting in adequate calories, it's fine. And more often than not, individuals like that, they're just like too low of intake, too high of intake, and they get in this ebb and flow, and then digestion falls off again. And so consistently tracking, even if it's just like every other day, just to make sure that you're staying in alignment and you have consistent meals that are in there, that would be good there. The other thing that I would say with digestion is, how are you feeling after the meals? Are you finding yourself in a situation that after you consume the meals, you're about to fall asleep? Like you can't even focus on the computer screen because you are so exhausted from the meal you just consumed. Like, we've got something going on with blood sugars, we've got something going on with digestion. We probably need to dig a little bit deeper and maybe lose a little bit of body fat or something along those lines. And so that is just a handful of the different possibilities that we could look at from digestion in a surplus, or even eating at maintenance or close to maintenance, because digestion is a complex topic to begin with, but is also something that plays such a large role in whatever goals that you have.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of like you said, I think it probably is something that maybe enough people don't pay attention to, especially when they are trying to put on lean body mass. Yeah. And it, like you said, it can really hinder things. What about like, I guess probably some other things there with that too would be like constipation. That would probably be a big one, or even on the other side of things, going too often, I'm sure, or again, maybe it's not like solid as well. Those would probably be some other things that you would potentially look at there. Probably a sign that, something somewhere down the line is off.
Sure. And fiber consumption can become a challenge as well when it comes to trying to get in adequate calories, because some individuals may go for more hypercaloric foods where they're not very fiber dense. And so they're not getting in adequate fiber. And so they're having a little bit of loose stools or something along those lines. And then it can go on the opposite end, where maybe they're trying to be as whole food based as they can
Yeah.
to get a higher calorie count in. And all of a sudden they're getting 40, 50, 60 grams of fiber alongside of that. And then they're experiencing the constipation and those different things. So keeping that in mind is going to be very important.
Yeah, almost like two ends of the extreme there, right? Where it's like, hey, they too much food volume, not enough. It's like both of those can end up being issues there. So kind of finding that sweet spot for you. No, I think that's a really good tip though. I think definitely paying attention to that is key. And also I think that's where a lot of people probably they get to the point where they're doing things like that. They don't feel comfortable. And that's where a lot of people probably end up like not sticking with it because because they don't feel great. And it's like, hey, look at your meal timing, food choice, stuff like that. You mentioned kind of the weight gain as well too, and looking at it on a per month basis. Was that something that did you try to stick with that kind of rate of gain? Was there a specific rate of gain? Is that kind of what you commonly give to clients as well too, like in terms of building? Is that kind of the rate of gain, or does it just kind of depend on the client and where they're at?
So for me, I have really struggled with adding muscle tissue for a majority of my life. I graduated high school, I think at 160 pounds, I want to say. And so then I went into college and was playing a sport with guys that were much bigger than me. And it was like, okay, I've got to figure something out to be able to add tissue. And that was kind of I had already gotten into nutrition and training while I was in high school. I was very fortunate to have great guidance at that time, but really turning that up to the max. And that was the time where I had maybe a little bit of a growth spurt as well. I was able to put on more muscle tissue at that time than I had ever had. But I've struggled to put on muscle for a majority of my life. I've had a challenge there. So when I first got into the surplus, I was really pushing food probably too much. And I had gained probably unnecessary body fat on the front end. We pulled back a little bit, stayed closer to maintenance than what I was. I lost some of that weight. And then we kind of found some ebbs and flows and got into good sync and followed more of that guideline that I had of a 1 to 1.5 pound gain from a month to month standpoint for probably the last year of that process was probably a pound to a pound and a half. And that would be also the thing that I follow with clients. And with clients, this is very dependent on them as individuals. Like, where are we at within our mental health? Where are we at within the things that are most important to them and making sure that that's the priority? So if we do need to stay a little bit leaner for that individual, I keep them as close as I possibly can while still making the progress. Do they lose a little bit of possibility of gaining the muscle tissue that they want? Maybe a little bit, but is that trade-off enough for them to still have proper mental health for us to even have any longevity to the growth that's going to be the most important thing? If that's the trade-off, then I'll take it. But if it's something where they're okay with seeing a little bit of extra fat gain for that little bit of extra benefit from adding muscle tissue, then we'll go for it. So it's really individually dependent and working with the client to explain all the different variables so that they're on the same page with me of what we're trying to accomplish. Because what I found through coaching is that if expectations are not in alignment with coach to client, it is a train wreck and a half before it even starts. And so getting those expectations very, very clear and making sure that we're on the same page is something that I really drive home.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think it's important to, again, like you kind of said there, you figure out the client, see what they need and kind of where they're at mentally, and then you explain, the pros and cons of probably each approach as well too, in terms of like, hey, if we go a little bit quicker with or a little bit higher surplus, it's like, hey, you probably will get a little bit more muscle, but are you okay with that a little bit of extra potential fat gain as well too? And yeah, I think that's super important. Do you see a difference between like men and women in this in terms of like response to the surplus from a mental standpoint, but actually just like a physical response too, or do you feel like it's pretty similar?
So it's a good question. I don't know if I see a large variance. I may be able to push into a greater surplus with my male clients. And also, this is something that is to note is that my female clients have better recovery from the training itself. So we don't really have to push. Like, we
Yeah.
see the improvements in strength, we see improvements in physique photos. Whereas with my male clients, we may need to be in a greater surplus for them to have the ability to recover. And the different factors that would go into that are vast. But to label a couple here, it could be along the lines of the amount of weight that's being lifted per session. Like, it's just going to be higher in the total volume or the weight that's being selected for each set. So that could be playing a role, to some degree. They have more muscle fibers that are contributing per contraction. That could be in part to that. But also it could just be that males are soft and females are tougher than males. I have no idea. Those things could certainly play a role too. So there's some small differences, but at the same time, it really is just so individualized that you just have to kind of play it by ear with what that client is needing.
Yeah, just again, see what they need and everything like that. I figured that would be your answer. Again, just individualized there on that. Do you find too though that like, a lot of people they kind of have this like misconception that, in order to really maximize muscle growth, they have to go into this huge surplus and they have to gain a ton of weight. Do you find that when, new clients come to you that, there's probably this period of time where like they have a lot of they have some like kind of low hanging fruit and some things that they can maximize before they really have to overly focus on getting into that like large surplus in order, or not large surplus, but a surplus to build muscle.
Of course, I think most people who come to me are needing to improve execution of their exercises, improve the program design, like having either the adequate amount of training volume or the adequate amount of training intensity to actually see the growth that they desire. So adjusting their training is first and foremost. It's before we even get into the nutrition side of things. And then we look at the nutrition and then we really dig into the digestion. So it's like we look at training performance and training quality. Then we look into digestion. What's going on here? Are we even able to digest the foods that we would need to go into a surplus? Do we have things that we need to address from a lifestyle perspective, whether that be stress, water consumption, sleep, those different variables to ensure that we're in a place to even do this? And then once those things are checked off the list, then we start to dig more into the actual nutrients that are being consumed of, okay, let's get a little bit more here and we can kind of space them out properly. I'm big on starting to make the pre and post workout meal as kind of my big rocks of let's get very well nourished around the training, and then we can start to build out the meals outside of that, and then look at the total caloric allotment as we're trying to put on muscle tissue. I find that to be a helpful tool, and it also depends on the client, right? And we said this 100 times throughout this episode, but it depends on the client and kind of what their experience level is. And if I have someone who's coming to me really like their big goal is putting on muscle tissue, being this nuanced, if you will, of looking at the meal structure is helpful to them because they have come from a place of like everything kind of works. It's just a matter of finding what works for them. And so then getting into more the nitty gritty of these specific meals and structuring things better is helpful and creates clarity for them to get towards their goal relative to being like, well, this could work or this could work and blah, 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 blah. We have, more of a strategy in place.
Yeah, the strategy and the structure is probably super important for a lot of people that come and get coaching. Yeah, because I just find that a lot of people, they kind of overly stress about that, like, oh, I want to build muscle, but I also don't want to gain a ton of weight. And it's like, I think you probably have a lot of leeway there before you really need to overly focus on that, getting into that surplus there. So cool, man. Nice little insight and some side tangents there from your training, which I think will be super helpful for a lot of clients, or the audience and clients, right? Both clients. Cool. So I wanted to kind of switch over to some glute training. I know that, you a lot of your social media content, I feel like is, you have a ton of content. A lot of it, I feel like you are very not specialized, but you are very knowledgeable in like glute training. So I just wanted to kind of bring you on here to chat about that a little bit. I think in our last episode, we sort of talked about some glute training as well too, but I'm just curious, kind of to start off this conversation around the glute training, what do you feel like is missing in most people's programs when it comes to glute training?
Training intensity as well as the proper amount of volume. I find that many individuals are just going in and they're like, this exercise, and this exercise is going to train my glutes. I'm just going to do these until the wheels fall off, which if they're the right exercises, I suppose could be a good approach, if you will. But I find that oftentimes it's going to be too much overall volume that they're performing. And then it's not at an adequate intensity for them to really see the results that they're wanting to have within glute growth. And so uh, I really drive home getting to a place where they're not scared to increase the weight itself, as well as they may be consuming content that is of like Miss Bikini Olympia or someone who is in a stage of their career of growing tissue that they're not really needing to grow muscle tissue any longer. They're more so just in a stage of maintaining the tissue that they've worked hard to build. And so then the individual who's needing to grow the tissue is trying to follow what that person's doing. They're like, why is this not working? It's like, well, that's not what they did to build the tissue. That's what they're doing now to maintain the tissue. And so getting to that place of having greater training intensity is paramount and something that I think many are missing out on.
Yeah, so it sounds like, again, it's like you'll see people do a lot of volume, but then it's like the overall volume for, I'm assuming specifically like glutes, maybe overall volume in general is just high as well too. But like you said, that intensity is not there within that. So it's like you're doing, I guess the phrase would be like junk volume, I guess, kind of in a way would be something that you could term that. So when you say like training intensity, what does that kind of look like? Like, how would you describe training intensity and whatnot?
So a great tool that I implement is that when a client comes on board, they will send me their current training and I will reference the total volume that's there and the rep ranges that they're commonly in. And oftentimes it's going to be between 12 and 15. And so I will take those rep ranges and we will utilize a descending rep scheme to start with our training so that we can get to a place where we have more confidence of increasing load set after set. So I may start with a descending rep that's 10, 8, 6, 4, for example. I may not go all the way down to 4. I may just go to 10, 8, 6. And this, what I will be teaching is that we need to go up each and every set. We're going to remove 2 repetitions, but with that removal of those 2 reps, we need to go up in weight, whatever that may be. Let's use the RDL, for example. And so if we're doing RDLs, maybe you have 50s in your hands for the 10s. Let's go for the 55s for the 8. Let's go for the 60s for the 6. Now, could they go up more than that? Probably. That's possible that they're going to go up, but it's a good starting point for them to say, okay, I can go up. I am stronger than what I have been or what I've been, telling myself for the times past, because there was recent literature that was published speaking about the self-reporting of training intensity or reporting their RPE. And I want to say that it was 70% of individuals were wrong within their self-reporting, or it was like 70% off or something along those lines. And so that's another thing where if you don't know what real failure feels like within your training, how are you going to report how close you were to the failure from set to set? And so then we work on the self-reporting side, and I'll go over the videos with them and we'll say, okay, what did you think the RPE was here? And then I will give my feedback of, well, you thought this was an 8, and really, I think this was closer to a 6. Like, you had at least 4 repetitions left in the tank when performing that exercise. Let's go ahead and go up next week, try to maintain the execution, but we're going to go for the same amount of reps and really push ourselves. And so that would be how I implement it with clients to really drive that home. And oftentimes this is a huge help to their self-confidence because they're breaking through a lot of mental barriers. They're going into the gym and being like, oh my gosh, I'm really nervous to go up. I'm a little scared. And they go in and they crush it, just as you and I have a number of times. And they're like, okay, I'm more capable. I feel like I can do this and I can do more. And being able to get on that train and have that high, if you will, is such a cool moment for them. And then that's when they're really able to see the progress that they want from building real muscle tissue.
So it seems like some of it's just like, teaching people maybe to train like their lower body glutes just a little bit, like with a little bit more weight, like a little bit heavier, maybe not like going for like, the higher rep ranges and whatnot. And really just, but also with that, making sure that you do push yourself closer to failure. And from my understanding of that literature, it's like, you kind of have two things that you see there with that. One, like you said, the self-reporting is off, but in the lower body specifically, it's, it tends to be a little bit more off. And then also in those higher rep ranges, it tends to be a little bit more off as well too. And I feel like that's where a lot of people kind of find themselves, when they're, struggling there with like glute training and lower body training and whatnot.
Yeah. And a couple things to talk about within the higher rep range is that the cardiovascular failure could happen before you get to that local muscle failure, which is often happening for a majority of people because they're not having the cardiovascular work in place to be strong enough there to push past that to get to the local muscular failure. And then if we're talking lower body training, they may be in a place where they're not utilizing VersaGrips or straps for the dumbbell or barbell that they're holding. And for them to get to a place where their forearms are not giving out before their hamstrings or glutes do is a far-fetched situation. And so not getting to local muscular failure because of the lack of tools that they're implementing is also another piece. And so those tools are a really big, important piece to making sure that lower body development, especially, gets to the place that it needs to be. And that would go for like back training as well.
Yeah, right. Yeah, making sure that you're actually taking that target muscle to close to failure, like you said, something like forearms taking over, or even like you said, like cardiovascularly, you're failing, not necessarily from a muscle standpoint. You also kind of mentioned, I don't know if it may have been before we start talking about glutes, but you talked about exercise selection being a big thing there. What would you say are like some like kind of essential movement patterns like for glute training? Like, what do you kind of like? Yeah, what would be kind of your like the essential movement patterns there for that?
So for glutes, you're saying?
Yeah, for glutes. Yeah.
So my favorite hinge variation is probably going to be a bent knee RDL. I think that that's going to be huge for us. And then for a squat variation, I find this to be a split, like a back foot elevated split squat is going to work really nicely, or a supported drop lunge is one that I'm pretty hooked on right this second. A
Okay.
leg press would also work in that arena. And then working through hip extension. So either a hip thrust or a 45-degree hip extension would work in that. And then any form of abduction is going to be a nice little addition. The other three are going to be bigger rocks for us to focus on, but having some training that's going to stress some of the abduction is going to be important. So like a glute med kickback, for example, could be a helpful tool in that. But those would be my big rocks of movements that we can overload for a long period of time, that we can see progression in, and have different rep ranges and different total volume that we're targeting within those exercises to get the results that we want to see.
Do you see any like common mistakes here like made with these? Do you see people maybe not focus on these movement patterns a little bit too much, or is there anything that with that?
I would say that people are aware of these movements. I think that split squats are very common. I think RDLs are very common, and hip thrusts are certainly common, but the execution of the exercises is not fantastic. And then getting to the intensity of really where they're going to see growth is not inherently there. And intensity is often misunderstood for like aggression. Like,
Yeah.
people can have aggression within their training, but not have true intensity to what they're doing within the exercise. They can bounce around and have very quick eccentrics and utilize a lot of the stretch reflex for the movements that they're trying to do and not get the actual muscular tension that they're trying to accomplish. And so aggression and those different things are going to be different than actual application to the training. So I think that the intensity as well as the execution are the missing links for people, not necessarily the exercises themselves, but how to perform them and at what intensity they need to be.
Right. Yeah. Cause you'll see a lot of people take the intensity side of things too far, like you said, and they make it aggressive. And it's like now they just lift super heavy and then like technique break and the technique's not great. And it's like, okay, yeah, you are lifting heavier, but are you actually putting more tension on the target muscle that we're trying to hit there? Yeah. Again, I feel like with fitness stuff, it's like opposite ends of the spectrum, right? It's like you get somebody here, you tell them to do it this way, and then they go all the way to the other side of it there with that. Do you see like some carryover to some of these lifts where it's like, something like a leg press? I think a lot of people would like, maybe say it's like could be quad focused. Now, is there like, do you kind of bias to make it more glute focused? And is there probably some carryover from like, hey, a squat or a leg press to some glute training? Or again, is it like do you make it more specifically like glute focused by, doing something specific there?
So with the leg press, you can set it up to be more hip dominant or glute bias within the foot placement, the height of the foot placement. I think on the note of the height of the foot placement, people can get caught up of, well, as if I can put my feet higher, the highest it can go on the platform, then I'm going to get more glute. And that's not inherently true. One easy tip to remember within foot placement for the leg press is the shin angle needs to be about 90 degrees. So as you get to the bottom of the exercise, you can just a straight line across the top of your shin. If it's elevated and you're kind of having like a hill line to your shin angle, then at that point it's probably too high. And so that would be a big thing. And then focusing on a high degree of hip flexion. So your upper leg being pressed up against your chest is going to be a high degree of hip flexion. And then having the foot placement be a little bit more narrow relative to wider or at shoulder width is going to allow for the glute fibers to lengthen more than what those other 2 foot placements would provide. And so those 3 little tips there can make it more glute bias within the leg press. The type of leg press is going to play a role depending on if it's like a sled or if it's horizontal or whatever the case may be. So the type of leg press can play a small role, but those tips are still going to stay in alignment for the goals that we would have.
Well, yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And then I guess to kind of follow up with that. So like, for example, something like a bent knee RDL, I know that you can, again, bias that towards more glutes, but I'm assuming there's probably going to be still some hamstring activation there within that. So, when you're programming this, are you kind of taking that into account here? Because I think a lot of people, maybe with the glutes specifically, because I feel like a lot of these things that you can do with glutes, like, for example, like leg press. And again, like you said, you can make it more biased, but even if you do like a quad focus leg press, or again, you do an RDL, like there's still going to be some kind of indirectly the glutes are still going to get hit. So like, do you kind of count that volume towards that? Or do you specifically try to like, hey, I'm going to do a bent knee RDL, and then I'm also going to try to do some RDL that's like a little bit more hamstring focused? Or is it just dependent on the client and their needs and whatnot?
Sure, the dependence is going to be on the client, but I'll give more context to the full question. So with the bent knee RDL, yes, there's going to be the hamstrings and the adductors are going to play a role to some degree. The amount of knee flexion that's being had is going to make the stabilization of the hamstrings, change. So the more knee flexion that we have, the more the hamstrings become more of a stabilizer relative to a primary mover. The more stiff we are through the knees, the more they're going to be in part to the primary movement of the hips moving forward and back. So that being said, when it comes to the program design, I find that I'm going to kind of make a note of, hey, if I have the bent knee RDL in, yes, I'm getting some volume to the hamstrings, but I'm probably not going to be doing something that's spinal loading again in the training that's going to try and hit the hamstrings, for the sheer fact of the fatigue that person's going to have from the bent knee RDL is probably going to be taking away from that hamstring if I was to do a stiff leg RDL following, or even like a conventional deadlift, for example. So if that was the movement that I prioritize, I may do like a seated hamstring curl or a lying hamstring curl later in the session to get more volume towards the hamstrings. But it wouldn't be something where I'd probably have spinal loading twice in a session in that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then like from an overall volume standpoint, what is that typically like? What do you find is kind of the sweet spot there from like a glute standpoint, like on a, I guess, per workout basis, but we can also extrapolate that out to like a per weekly basis as well too.
It's a good question. So when we look at per session, I think that is in large part to how many sets are we taking to failure. So for my client's training, we're going to be between a 7 and 9 RPE for a lot of our total sets, and we may take around 2 sets to failure, depending on what those exercises are, is going to also dictate the amount of total sets that they're performing for that muscle group per session. And so let's use the example of I'm going to take a final set of bent knee RDL to failure, which is going to have a high fatigue, from that. And then I'm going to take, let's say, a set of hip thrust, or make it a little bit easier. We'll use a 45-degree hip extension, the last set to failure. So both of those are going to be very challenging for the glutes, but the fatigue onset from the 45-degree hip extension is not going to be near as high as what I'm going to get from a systemic full body fatigue that I'm going to experience from the bent knee RDL. And so in that particular example, I may have between 8 and 10, maybe even up to 12, depending on how the training structure falls, for total sets towards glutes for that particular session. But I'm going to have them be partitioned to what is my emphasis with this particular goal. And with the bent knee RDL, I'm biasing towards the lengthened position of the glutes. That's crossed off my list. I don't need to do more lengthened bias glute work because I'm going to get all my work there. That's my goal within that session. So I need to get into the shortened glute, and then I could do some lengthened glute med or some of the upper glute max I'm targeting in a different way. So maybe I go with a more lengthened exercise towards that particular muscle group, but then I do a glute med kickback. Those different things are going to be advantageous. And I could also do something that was lengthened glute that would be supported, like is not going to be spinal loading. So maybe like a leg press. I could do something along those lines to add into that session. When I look at the total week of volume, and we're in a hypertrophy phase, someone is well prepared to take on volume. They've got the adequate nutrients in place. I would say that a starting phase could be anywhere between 10 and 14 sets towards the glutes as we titrate through the completion of the training, which could be between 6 and 10 weeks, just depending on how we're progressing and those different factors. We may get to 20 sets at the top end. I would say like 22 total sets across the week, spread maybe 2 sessions. Maybe if we're lucky and have incredible recovery, maybe we partition that across 3. I like to have a greater frequency of training if possible, so that we can just have more focus per session. So if I can spread that volume across 3 sessions and we have adequate recovery, in my mind, we're able to get more load per set accomplished relative to trying to get them more into one singular workout that they may have. So if at bare minimum, we have 2, and if we can really make it work and their schedule works, then we get it into 3. But trying to get all of the volume, if your goal was to grow glutes and you were trying to get all the volume into one session, that's a little crazy, because the fatigue is going to take away from the intensity that you're able to achieve, especially later on into the session. So the volume that you're accomplishing at that time, although challenging, is probably not going to be stimulating enough for you to get the response that you're wanting to have.
Yeah, no, I mean, you summed that up great, because I know volume, I mean, man, it's just such a nuanced topic. I feel
It
like
is.
there's just so many things that go into it, but I think you explained that really well, right? I mean, exercise selection is going to play a huge role in that. Again, recovery is going to play a huge role in that. And that specific person is going to play a huge role. But I think you gave people some general guidelines to kind of what to expect in terms of like a weekly volume. And again, I agree with you. I think definitely at least splitting it up into 2 different sessions, potentially even 3, I guess, if you can, would be solid, because like you said, you really get the quality volume in that you need there on that. So you kind of hit on this a little bit. So these would be my final 2 questions before I let you go here. You kind of hit on it a little bit though. Do you need to bias like areas of the glutes? Like, do you think that's important? And then, with all this kind of talk and I guess the evidence-based community about like length and partials, length and work, have you incorporated a little bit into your training? And has that kind of changed your mind at all on glute training or anything like that?
So what was say the
Sorry,
first
I know
question again?
I
You're
threw
okay.
I threw too much at you there, man.
You're okay.
Sorry. Do you need to bias areas of the glutes, like, because they're like, as you kind of mentioned glute med, glute and whatnot.
Mhm.
So is that important? Do you think is that something you take into consideration there with that?
So I do take it into consideration. It is going to be dependent on the individual. So if I'll use 2 client examples here, is that if I have a mom who is just wanting to feel great in a bikini for the summer, I'm not going to have a like speaking to her, I'm not going to have this breakdown of, hey, this is the upper portion of your glute max. This is the lower portion of your glute max. This is how we're going to be biasing these different exercises to grow this aspect, or this is the glute med, and we're going to be, going about it that way. I may program it just so that we have greater balance, because there is going to be exercises that are very specific to the lower portion of the glute max, for example, that we could really get great at. And then what she's going to see from her physique photos is like, I don't feel like my glutes look how I want them to, because it would be like she has muscle tissue, but it's going to be a little bit of a flatter look. But if we have a greater bias towards the upper portion of her glute max, it's going to give her more of a bubbly look. And that's kind of what she's looking for. So she doesn't inherently need to know all of that information of like, this is how this is happening, but I'm paying attention to that within the goals that she has when I'm creating the programming. When I have a competitor, for example, who is coming to me and they gotten on the national stage and missed the mark to getting their pro card, and they're trying to improve the upper portion of their glute, then I'm going to really dig into the nuance of, these are the exercises that are going to have a greater impact of us growing that portion of your glute. And this is how we're going to do it. And we have to be very particular within our execution and really get towards the intensity and getting more into that nuance for that particular client. And so I do certainly pay attention to it, and it's going to be in alignment with whatever the goal the client has. And then to answer your question on the lengthened partials, this is a tough one, because the client has to be very well, has to do a great job of execution for the first and foremost, because within lengthened partials, we can get into a place where we're trying to generate so much momentum and jerking the load that it's just not really worth our time. Are we getting actually more benefit? Or are we just creating more discomfort in areas that are supporting, the lower back or something along those lines, right? So I haven't used it a ton, and in part two, I don't have a ton of content that I can send to a client and say, this is what I'm wanting to have done. So if I was to program it now at this time, I would have to depend on them to like have the resources. And I don't want to put them in a place, like they pay good money for me to have the resources to do what I say. And so once we would be able to make greater content around it and give more education to it, then I may program it more. But it's one of those things that, how much is it going to benefit the person? Is it going to really make that large of a difference to really change their training? And from a fatigue or soreness standpoint, that is going to upregulate with these lengthened partials, and then having to adjust. There's just a lot of different moving variables that, to me, with that small difference, how much of a benefit am I actually getting to their hypertrophy goals, to equate for all the differences that are going to have to be within, that small change, to doing 3 sets of 8 now goes from doing just 3 or 8 reps of regular repetitions to now doing 8 reps of lengthened partials. So now we've really got 16 reps where the movement is the most challenging, which is a very different approach or fatigue ratio that we would be experiencing than just having the normal 8 repetitions. And can that same gain or hypertrophy be accomplished by just performing another full range of motion set? That's my question.
Yeah, no, I think those are all valid points. And, again, the kind of the pros and cons, risk versus reward. And I guess it's not necessarily a risk, but it's just like, hey, you might have to change other things. And again, is that going to be worth it? And from my understanding too, like it hasn't been any direct research on the glutes specifically for like lengthened partials or lengthened work. Now, I believe there was like a preprint maybe where they did look at this, but I don't think it's like out yet. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or if you.
It's possible. I haven't seen it myself. It's one of those things that I'm very slow to jump on the bandwagon of these different literature pieces,
Yeah.
because I often think that it is something where the fitness community is bored with talking about the same thing. So then
Yeah,
they see
I
something
agree.
flashy and they're like, ooh, well, I can post about this and talk about the research and say how much better it is than everything else. When in reality, it's like, is it really that much better? Or are you just bored with the things that actually work type situation?
Yeah, it's like we kind of tell our clients, hey, don't change exercises all the time because you're getting bored. And then it's kind of the same thing, oh, hey, there's this new hot thing that's out. Let's talk about that.
Exactly.
So cool, man. Ton of great information in here. Appreciate your time. Before I let you go, is there anywhere where you want to lead the audience to, or where they can find you, or anything like that?
Absolutely. You guys can find me on Instagram at Alex Bush, BUSH __. I've tried to buy the Instagram account of just at Alex Bush a number of times, and that individual wants a ridiculous amount of money
Really?
for it. So that's never going to happen.
Wow.
And you can find our website at physiquedevelopment.com. And then we have a training app that is the Physique Development Training Club. And you could find that on any of your app stores or Google Play. And then you can find our YouTube at just Physique Development Podcast. And we have a YouTube channel as well, which is just Physique Development on YouTube. And we have all the best exercises, as well as we're going to be getting into more training vlogs as we've had in the past. We're going to be getting back into that here soon, which I'm really excited about.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I use a lot of your guys' video exercise videos on True Coach and stuff like that. So a ton of like, those exercise demos are super helpful. So yeah, we'll make sure we link all that stuff in there. And yeah, awesome, man. Well, appreciate your time. A ton of great information in here, and we'll have to do this again. Hopefully not 2.5 years.
Yeah, we'll do it. We'll do it more frequently.
Cool. All right, man. Thank you.
Awesome.